Samchai wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped through the heavy wooden doors of the ancient training camp in northern Thailand. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty courtyard where dozens of fighters were already deep into their routines. The rhythmic sound of leather gloves hitting heavy bags echoed through the air, mixed with the sharp crack of shin bones connecting with wooden posts. At 22 years old, Samchai had already earned a reputation as one of the most promising Muay Thai fighters in his province. His lean frame carried the scars of countless battles in village rings, each mark telling a story of determination and survival. Growing up in a small farming village where opportunities were as scarce as the monsoon rains, fighting had become his only path to a better life. The camp belonged to Kru Prazit, a legendary trainer who had once fought before royalty in the grand stadiums of Bangkok. Now in his 60s, the old master still moved with the fluid grace that had made him famous decades ago. His weathered face bore the wisdom of someone who had seen both triumph and tragedy in equal measure. "You're late," Kru Prazit called out as Samchai approached the training area. The old man's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to discipline and respect. "The bus broke down on the mountain road, Kru," Samchai replied, bowing respectfully with his hands pressed together in a traditional Y greeting. Kru Prazit studied his student with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had been training Samchai for 3 years, watching him transform from a raw village boy into a skilled warrior. The young man possessed something special, a combination of natural talent, unwavering determination, and, most importantly, the heart of a true fighter. "Today we work on your clinch game," the master announced. "Your elbows are sharp like broken glass, but you need to learn when to use them and when to hold back." The training session began with the traditional Ram Muay, the ritual dance performed before every fight to pay respect to teachers and ancestors. Samchai moved through the ancient choreography with reverence, his body flowing through poses that had been passed down through generations of fighters. This wasn't just physical preparation, it was a spiritual connection to the art that defined his very existence. For 2 hours, Samchai worked with different training partners, practicing the devastating elbow strikes that had become his signature weapon. His technique was flawless, each movement precise and powerful. The other fighters in the camp had learned to respect the sharp points of his elbows, which could open cuts and end fights in seconds. As the morning session concluded, Kru Prazit pulled Samchai aside. "There's something I need to tell you," the old master said, his expression unusually serious. "I received a call yesterday from Bangkok. They want you to fight in a special exhibition match." Samchai's heart raced with excitement. Bangkok represented the pinnacle of Muay Thai, where the best fighters in the world competed in legendary stadiums like Lumpini and Rajadamnern. This could be the opportunity he had dreamed of since childhood. "Who would I be fighting?" Samchai asked, trying to contain his enthusiasm. Kru Prazit paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's not a regular fight. This is for a cultural celebration at the royal palace. You would be demonstrating traditional Muay Thai techniques for foreign dignitaries and members of the royal family." The weight of those words settled over Samchai like a heavy blanket. Fighting before royalty was an honor reserved for only the most respected warriors. It was a chance to represent not just himself, but his village, his trainer, and the ancient art of Muay Thai itself. The demonstration would involve sparring with members of the royal guard, Kru Prazit continued. "These are not professional fighters, but they are trained soldiers who practice traditional martial arts as part of their duties. The matches are meant to be controlled exhibitions, showing the beauty and technique of our national sport." Samchai nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't about winning or losing, it was about honor, tradition, and representing his country's cultural heritage on the most prestigious stage imaginable. Over the following weeks, Samchai's training intensified beyond anything he had ever experienced. Kru Prazit worked with him not just on physical techniques, but on the mental discipline required to control his natural fighting instincts. In a real fight, Samchai's aggressive style and devastating elbows were assets. In a royal demonstration, they could become dangerous liabilities. "You must learn to fight like water," Kru Prazit explained during one particularly grueling session. "Strong enough to carve through stone, but gentle enough not to break the container that holds it." The concept frustrated Samchai initially. His entire fighting career had been built on controlled aggression and the ability to finish opponents quickly and decisively. Learning to pull his punches while still demonstrating proper technique required a completely different mindset. Days turned into weeks as Somchai refined his approach. He practiced with junior students from the camp, learning to showcase the beauty of Muay Thai without causing injury. His natural power had to be channeled into precise, controlled movements that honored the art form while keeping everyone safe. The other fighters at the camp watched his preparation with a mixture of admiration and envy. Many had trained for years without receiving such an opportunity. Somchai carried their hopes and dreams along with his own as he prepared for what could be the defining moment of his career. 3 days before his departure to Bangkok, Somchai visited his family's small farm to say goodbye. His parents, who had never fully understood his decision to pursue fighting instead of working the rice fields, finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what their son had achieved. "We are proud of you," his father said, placing a weathered hand on Somchai's shoulder. "You carry our family name and our village with you to the palace." His mother pressed a small Buddhist amulet into his palm. "This belonged to your grandfather," she explained. "He was a soldier who served with honor. May it bring you protection and wisdom." The night before leaving for Bangkok, Somchai lay awake staring at the ceiling of his small room at the training camp. Tomorrow would begin the journey that could change his entire life. Success in the royal demonstration could open doors to international opportunities, sponsorships, and a chance to lift his family out of poverty. But, with opportunity came risk. One mistake, one moment of lost control, could destroy everything he had worked toward. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like the humid Thai air before a storm. Kru Prazit found him sitting alone in the courtyard just before dawn, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The old master said nothing at first, simply sitting beside his student in comfortable silence. "Are you afraid?" Kru Prazit finally asked. Somchai considered the question carefully. "Not of fighting," he replied. "But of dishonoring you, my family, and our art." The old master smiled. "Good," he said. "A warrior without fear is reckless. A warrior who fears dishonor is wise." As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Somchai felt a sense of calm settle over him. Whatever happened in Bangkok, he would face it with the same courage and determination that had brought him this far. The bus to Bangkok would arrive in 2 hours. Soon, he would leave behind the familiar mountains and rice paddies of his homeland for the bustling capital city where his destiny awaited. In his mind, he could already hear the ceremonial music that would accompany his demonstration, feel the weight of royal eyes upon him as he moved through the ancient techniques of his ancestors. He had no way of knowing that in just a few days, one split-second decision would change not only his own life, but ripple through the highest levels of Thai society in ways he could never imagine. The bus journey to Bangkok took 8 hours through winding mountain roads and endless rice paddies. Somchai pressed his face against the window, watching his rural world gradually transform into something he had only seen in magazines and television programs. Small villages gave way to larger towns, which eventually merged into the sprawling metropolis of Thailand's capital city. Bangkok assaulted his senses from the moment he stepped off the bus. The air was thick with exhaust fumes, street food aromas, and the constant hum of millions of people going about their daily lives. Motorcycles weaved through impossible gaps in traffic while vendors shouted their wares from every corner. Gleaming skyscrapers stretched toward the clouds, their glass facades reflecting the chaos below. A driver in a crisp white uniform held a sign with Somchai's name written in both Thai and English. The man's professional demeanor and the luxury sedan he led them to reinforced the magnitude of the opportunity ahead. As they navigated through the congested streets toward the Royal Palace district, Somchai tried to process the sheer scale of the city around him. The hotel where they housed him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Marble floors stretched across lobbies decorated with golden ornaments and fresh orchids. His room on the 15th floor offered a panoramic view of the Chao Phraya River and the glittering spires of ancient temples. The bed was larger than his entire room back at the training camp. That evening, an official from the Royal Household Bureau arrived to brief him on the protocols and expectations for the demonstration. Colonel Witchett was a distinguished man in his 50s, wearing a perfectly pressed military uniform adorned with ceremonial decorations. "You understand the honor you have been given," Colonel Witchett began without preamble. "Tomorrow you will perform before His Majesty's guests and members of the royal family. This is not entertainment, it is cultural diplomacy of the highest order." Samchai listened intently as the colonel explained the detailed schedule. Foreign ambassadors and dignitaries from 12 countries would attend the cultural showcase. The Muay Thai demonstration was intended to highlight Thailand's rich martial arts heritage alongside traditional dance performances and classical music. "You will be paired with Captain Narong of the Royal Guard," Colonel Witchett continued. "He is an experienced soldier and martial artist, but he is not a professional fighter. The demonstration should showcase technique and artistry, not aggressive combat." Captain Narong was introduced as a model soldier in his early 30s. Standing slightly taller than Samchai with a military bearing that spoke of discipline and training, he carried himself with quiet confidence. His handshake was firm, his manner respectful but reserved. "I've studied Muay Thai since my military academy days," Captain Narong explained as they walked through the palace gardens during their first meeting. "It's an honor to share the ring with someone of your skill level." The two men spent the afternoon practicing together in a private training area within the palace complex. Samchai was impressed by the captain's technical knowledge and fundamental skills. While not at professional level, Narong clearly understood the art and moved with practiced efficiency. The practice session went smoothly. They worked through various combinations and defensive techniques, with Samchai demonstrating proper form while Narong played the role of a skilled amateur. The choreographed nature of their demonstration began to take shape as they found a rhythm that showcased both the beauty and effectiveness of traditional Muay Thai. That night, Samchai called his family from his hotel room. His mother's voice crackled through the long-distance connection, filled with pride and worry in equal measure. "Remember who you are and where you come from," she told him. "The palace may be golden, but your heart belongs to the mountains." Sleep came fitfully despite the luxurious surroundings. Samchai's mind raced with thoughts of the next day's performance. He had fought in front of hostile crowds, faced opponents who wanted to hurt him, and competed when injured or exhausted. But performing before royalty and foreign dignitaries presented entirely different pressures. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear and hot. Samchai woke before sunrise, as was his habit, and went through his meditation routine on the hotel balcony. The city sprawled endlessly in all directions, but in the distance he could make out the golden spires of the grand palace where his destiny waited. A formal breakfast was served in the hotel's executive dining room. Colonel Witchett joined him, reviewing the final details one more time. The demonstration would take place in the palace's ceremonial courtyard, with raised seating for the royal family and honored guests. Traditional musicians would provide accompaniment, and the entire event would be recorded for historical archives. "Remember," the colonel emphasized, "this represents our nation's culture to the world. Every movement, every technique must reflect the nobility and artistry of our martial heritage." The drive to the palace took them through Bangkok's historic district, past temples that had stood for centuries and monuments to kings whose names were legend. As they approached the palace gates, Samchai felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This was where Thailand's monarchs had ruled for generations, where decisions affecting millions of people had been made, where tradition and modernity continued their eternal dance. Palace guards in elaborate uniforms checked their credentials at multiple checkpoints. Each gate they passed through seemed to transport them further from the modern world into a realm of ancient protocol and ceremony. Finally, they arrived at the courtyard where the demonstration would take place. The setting took Samchai's breath away. Golden stupas and traditional Thai architecture surrounded an open space where they had constructed a temporary ring. Red carpet led from the entrance to elevated seating areas decorated with silk banners and fresh flowers. Traditional dancers were rehearsing their routines while musicians tuned their instruments. In a private preparation area, Samchai changed into traditional Muay Thai shorts made of the finest silk, embroidered with golden thread in patterns that honored ancient warriors. The monkal headband he would wear had been blessed by senior monks and carried the prayers of everyone who had contributed to his journey. Captain Narong appeared equally resplendent in his ceremonial uniform modified for the demonstration. Despite their practice sessions, both men felt the gravity of performing before such an august audience. This wasn't just about showcasing martial arts, they were cultural ambassadors representing Thailand's heritage to the world. An hour before the ceremony, the guests began arriving. Somchai caught glimpses of the dignitaries through a window in his preparation room. Ambassadors from major world powers, business leaders, and cultural figures from across Asia and beyond took their assigned seats. The precision and ceremony reminded him of the formal rituals surrounding important Muay Thai matches, but amplified to a level he had never experienced. When members of the royal family made their entrance, the entire atmosphere shifted. Everyone rose and remained standing until the royals had taken their seats. The level of respect and ceremony exceeded anything Somchai had witnessed, even in the most traditional village celebrations of his youth. Colonel Witchet appeared at his door. "It's time," he announced. As they walked toward the courtyard, Somchai felt his training take over. The nervousness that had plagued him all morning transformed into focused concentration. This was what he had been born to do, to represent the art that had shaped his life and the culture that had formed his character. The traditional music began as he and Captain Narong entered the ceremonial space. They performed the Ram Muay with perfect synchronization, their movements flowing like water as they paid respect to their teachers, their ancestors, and the royal family watching from their elevated seats. The demonstration began beautifully. Both men moved with grace and precision, showcasing the technical excellence and artistic beauty of traditional Muay Thai. Somchai demonstrated classic techniques while Captain Narong provided skilled defense and counterattacks. The audience watched in respectful silence, clearly impressed by the display of cultural heritage. For the first 10 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as rehearsed. Somchai controlled his power perfectly, showing the devastating potential of his techniques while ensuring Captain Narong's safety. The captain responded with equally professional skill, making Somchai's ability shine while demonstrating his own competence. Then, in a moment that would haunt Somchai for the rest of his life, everything changed. As they moved into a clinch position, Captain Narong attempted a knee strike that came in faster and harder than they had practiced. The move wasn't malicious, perhaps the adrenaline of performing before royalty had affected his control, or maybe he simply misjudged the distance and timing. But Somchai's body reacted with the instincts of a seasoned fighter. In the split second when he felt the unexpected power behind the captain's knee, his training took over completely. Without conscious thought, his elbow came up in the devastating sock clap technique, a short, sharp upward strike designed to end fights immediately. The sound of the impact echoed across the silent courtyard like a gunshot. Time seemed to freeze as Captain Narong's body went rigid, then crumpled to the ornate floor of the ceremonial courtyard. The sharp crack of Somchai's elbow connecting with the captain's jaw had silenced not only the traditional music but every breath in the royal pavilion. A crimson stream began flowing from a cut above the captain's left eye, staining the pristine marble beneath him. Somchai stood motionless, his elbow still positioned where it had completed its devastating arc. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. One moment they had been flowing through their carefully choreographed demonstration, and the next he had delivered a fight-ending blow to a member of the royal guard in front of the king's own family. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, pandemonium erupted. Palace guards rushed into the ring from all directions, their ceremonial uniforms giving way to urgent efficiency. Medical personnel who had been stationed discreetly around the courtyard converged on Captain Narong's motionless form. Colonel Witchet's face had drained of all color as he barked orders into a radio that had materialized in his hand. "Nobody moves," shouted the head of palace security, a stern woman whose voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "This area is now under security protocol." Somchai found himself surrounded by guards whose decorative weapons had suddenly become very real. Their eyes held the cold professionalism of men trained to eliminate threats to the royal family without hesitation. He raised his hand slowly, palm outward, in a gesture of submission that felt foreign to everything his fighting instincts demanded. "I didn't mean to," he began, but one of the guards silenced him with a sharp gesture. The royal guests sat frozen in their elevated seats, uncertain whether to flee or remain. Several ambassadors whispered urgently to their security details while others simply stared in shock at the scene unfolding below them.
The cultural celebration that was meant to showcase Thailand's noble traditions had become an international diplomatic nightmare in the span of 30 seconds. Medical personnel worked frantically over Captain Narong's unconscious form. A doctor who had been attending the ceremony in his capacity as royal physician pushed through the crowd and began examining the captain with swift, practiced movements. His trained fingers probed for signs of serious head trauma while an assistant checked vital signs. "He's breathing normally," the doctor announced loud enough for the guards to hear. "Pulse is strong. Appears to be a concussion with possible jaw fracture." Samchai felt a wave of relief wash over him. Captain Narong was alive. The blow that had felt so devastating might not have caused permanent damage. But, even as this hope flickered in his chest, he knew that the captain's physical condition was only one part of the catastrophe he had created. Colonel Witchett approached with measured steps, his military bearing intact despite the crisis swirling around them. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone whose career had just been destroyed along with Samkai's. "You will come with me immediately," the colonel said. "Do not speak. Do not look at the royal family. Do not do anything except follow my orders exactly." As they prepared to escort Samchai from the courtyard, Captain Narong began to stir. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. The doctor leaned over him, asking quiet questions to assess his cognitive function. Even from a distance, Samchai could see the captain trying to remember what had happened. The sight of the injured soldier attempting to sit up brought a fresh wave of guilt crashing over Samchai. Captain Narong was a good man who had shown him nothing but respect and courtesy. He had volunteered to participate in this cultural demonstration as a service to his country. And Samchai had repaid that trust by nearly knocking him unconscious in front of the most important audience in Thailand. "Can you hear me, Captain?" the doctor was asking. "Do you know where you are?" Narong's response was mumbled and unclear, but he seemed to be regaining consciousness steadily. The medical team carefully lifted him onto a stretcher, taking elaborate precautions to protect his neck and spine. As they carried him toward a waiting ambulance that had somehow appeared in the palace courtyard, his eyes briefly met Samkai's. There was no anger in that gaze, only confusion and, perhaps, disappointment. Somehow, that made everything worse. The royal family had been discreetly escorted from their seats during the medical emergency, but their absence felt heavier than their presence had. Somewhere in the palace, conversations were taking place that would determine Samkai's fate. The king himself had witnessed a foreign fighter assault a member of his personal guard during a cultural celebration meant to honor Thailand's traditions. Colonel Witchett led him through a maze of corridors deep within the palace complex. These were not the ornate public spaces decorated for tourists and ceremonies, but working areas where the business of monarchy took place. Guards at every intersection tracked their movement with professional attention, though none spoke or interfered. They finally stopped in a small, austere room that felt more like a military briefing area than part of a royal palace. A single table and 4 chairs occupied the space, along with communication equipment that looked decidedly modern among the traditional architecture. "Sit," Colonel Witchett commanded, then left without another word. Alone for the first time since the incident, Samchai tried to understand how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. He replayed those final moments of the demonstration over and over in his mind, searching for something he could have done differently. Captain Narong's knee had come in harder than expected, that much was clear. But professional fighters dealt with unexpected attacks constantly. A true master should have been able to adapt, to turn the situation into an opportunity to demonstrate superior technique and control. Instead, his body had reacted with the savage efficiency that won village tournaments and regional championships. In those brutal competitions, a fighter survived by responding to aggression with overwhelming force. Hesitation meant defeat, and defeat often meant serious injury or financial ruin. His elbow strike had been perfect from a technical standpoint, precisely targeted, explosively powerful, designed to end the fight instantly. But this hadn't been a fight. It had been a cultural demonstration, an artistic showcase, a diplomatic gesture between Thailand and the world. And he had turned it into exactly the kind of savage spectacle that critics used to condemn Muay Thai as barbaric and uncivilized.
The door opened and Colonel Witchett returned, accompanied by a stern woman in civilian clothes whose bearing suggested high military rank despite her formal business attire. They sat across from him without introduction or ceremony.
"Explain what happened," the woman said without preamble.
Samchai chose his words carefully, knowing that everything he said would be analyzed and reported to levels of government he could barely comprehend. The captain threw a knee strike with more power than we had practiced, he began. My body reacted automatically to defend against what it perceived as a serious attack. I struck with full force before my mind could override my training. The woman took notes in a small leather book while Colonel Witchett stared at the table.
The questions that followed were thorough and precise. Had there been any animosity between him and Captain Narong? Had anyone instructed him to make the demonstration more realistic or exciting? Was he under the influence of any substances? Did he understand the gravity of what he had done?
To each question, Samchai gave honest answers that seemed to dig his grave deeper. No, there had been no conflict with the captain. No, no one had asked him to increase the intensity. No, he was completely sober and clear-headed. And, yes, he understood that he had potentially created an international incident by injuring a royal guard in front of the king's family and foreign dignitaries. Captain Narong is stable, the woman finally informed him. Concussion and a hairline fracture of the jaw, but no permanent damage expected. He will make a full recovery. Relief flooded through Samchai so powerfully that he nearly collapsed.
The captain would be all right.
Whatever consequences he faced, at least he hadn't permanently harmed a good man who had trusted him. But the woman's next words crushed that relief immediately. However, the incident has created serious complications beyond the captain's injuries. The royal family is deeply displeased. Foreign dignitaries are questioning Thailand's ability to control its own cultural demonstrations.
And there are already news reports circulating internationally about violence at a palace ceremony.
She closed her notebook with a sharp snap that seemed to echo through the small room. You will remain in palace custody while we determine how to address this situation.
You are not under arrest at this time, but you are certainly not free to leave. Your movements will be restricted and monitored until further notice.
2 guards appeared at the door as if summoned by invisible signal.
They escorted Samchai through more corridors to a guest room that was clearly intended for detention rather than hospitality.
The windows were barred, the door locked from the outside, and a guard took position in the hallway. As evening fell over Bangkok, Samchai sat on the edge of his narrow bed and tried to comprehend the magnitude of his situation. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been the rising star of Muay Thai, chosen to represent his country's martial arts heritage on the most prestigious stage imaginable. Now he was a palace prisoner whose single moment of instinctive reaction had possibly destroyed his career, embarrassed his nation, and injured a man who had shown him nothing but respect. Through the barred window, he could see lights beginning to twinkle across the vast city. Somewhere out there, his parents were probably watching the news, trying to understand what had happened to their son. Kruprasad was likely fielding calls from reporters and officials, his reputation potentially damaged by association with his failed student. The weight of disappointing everyone who had believed in him felt heavier than any physical opponent he had ever faced in the ring. In Muay Thai, a fighter could lose a match and live to fight another day. But some defeats carried consequences that extended far beyond the sport itself. As night deepened around the palace, Samchai realized that his real fight was just beginning. 3 days passed in the sterile guest room that had become Samchai's prison. Each morning brought the same routine, a silent guard delivering modest meals, brief visits from officials asking the same questions, and long hours staring through barred windows at a city that seemed to have forgotten he existed. On the 4th morning, everything changed. Colonel Witchett entered his room accompanied by Captain Narong himself. The captain's jaw was wired shut and a spectacular bruise covered the left side of his face, but he was walking upright and his eyes were clear and alert. Samchai shot to his feet, bowing deeply in the traditional Y gesture of respect and apology. Words seemed inadequate for the guilt and remorse that had been eating at him since that terrible moment in the courtyard. "Captain, I am so deeply sorry," he began, but Narong raised a hand to stop him. The captain pulled out a small notepad and pen, writing carefully before showing Samchai the message. It was an accident.
I know you didn't mean to hurt me.
The simple words hit Samchai harder than any physical blow ever had. This man, who had every right to hate him, was offering forgiveness that he didn't deserve. Colonel Witchett cleared his throat. Captain Narong has spoken extensively with palace officials about the incident. His testimony has been helpful to your situation. Over the next hour, the full story emerged. Captain Narong had indeed thrown his knee strike with more force than they had practiced, caught up in the excitement and pressure of performing before royalty. He had told investigators that any experienced fighter would have reacted defensively to such an attack, and that Samkai's response, while excessive, was understandable given his background and training. More importantly, the captain had requested a private audience with senior members of the royal household to personally vouch for Samkai's character and to explain the technical aspects of what had occurred. His willingness to take partial responsibility for the incident had dramatically altered how palace officials viewed the situation. There will still be consequences, Colonel Witchett explained.
The incident cannot simply be ignored.
But the king himself has expressed appreciation for Captain Narong's honorable conduct and has taken that into consideration when determining your fate. That afternoon, Samchai found himself standing in an ornate reception chamber facing a panel of royal officials and military commanders. The room's golden decorations and ancient artwork reminded him constantly of where he was and who held his future in their hands. The chief royal secretary, an elderly man whose formal robes marked him as one of the highest-ranking officials in the palace hierarchy, read from an official document that would determine the rest of Samkai's life. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, including the exemplary character reference provided by Captain Narong, His Majesty has decided that criminal charges will not be pursued in this matter. Samkai's knees nearly buckled with relief, but the secretary continued. However, the incident represents a serious breach of protocol and has caused embarrassment to the kingdom in front of foreign dignitaries. Therefore, the following conditions will apply if the terms were harsh but fair.
Samchai was banned from competing professionally in Thailand for 2 years. He was required to perform 500 hours of community service teaching traditional Muay Thai to underprivileged children. He would also undergo additional training in ceremony and protocol before being allowed to represent Thailand in any official capacity again. Most significantly, he was being assigned as a junior instructor at the Royal Guard training facility, where he would work under Captain Narong's supervision once the captain recovered from his injuries. This assignment serves multiple purposes, the secretary explained. It allows you to contribute positively to the kingdom while demonstrating your rehabilitation. It also provides Captain Narong with access to high-level training that may benefit the Royal Guard as a whole. The irony was not lost on Samchai.
The man he had injured would become his supervisor, the institution he had embarrassed would become his workplace, and the sport that had gotten him into trouble would become his path to redemption. That evening, as he prepared to leave the palace for the first time in almost a week, Captain Narong approached him one final time. The captain wrote another message in his notebook. I want to learn that elbow technique. When I recover, you will teach me properly. The statement was so unexpected that Samchai actually laughed, the first time he had felt anything approaching happiness since the incident. Here was a man who had been knocked unconscious by that very technique, asking to learn it from the person who had nearly destroyed his career. 6 months later, Samchai stood in the training yard of the Royal Guard facility, watching a group of young soldiers practice the fundamental movements of Muay Thai. His role as instructor had evolved far beyond what anyone had originally envisioned. Captain Narong, now fully recovered and speaking normally again, had become not just his supervisor but his partner in developing a new training program that incorporated traditional Muay Thai techniques into military combat training. The captain's experience and military knowledge combined with Samkai's fighting expertise had created something unique and effective. Your students are improving rapidly, Captain Narong observed as they watched the soldiers work through their drills. Several have expressed interest in competing in amateur tournaments.
Samchai nodded, feeling a pride different from what he had experienced as a professional fighter.
These young men weren't learning Muay Thai for money or fame, but as part of their service to their country.
Teaching them carried a responsibility that was both humbling and inspiring.
The community service requirement had also transformed from a punishment into something meaningful. Every weekend, Samchai worked with children from Bangkok's poorest neighborhoods, teaching them not just fighting techniques but discipline, respect, and confidence. Many of these kids faced challenges that made his own rural upbringing seem comfortable by comparison. One student in particular had captured his attention, a thin 12-year-old named Lek whose natural talent reminded Samchai of himself at that age. The boy's family struggled to afford proper training, but his dedication and heart set him apart from other students. Crew Samchai, Lek called out during a recent training session, using the traditional title of respect for teachers.
"When I grow up, I want to fight in the palace like you did." The innocent comment had stopped Samchai cold.
In the boy's eyes, his moment of shame had somehow transformed into something admirable. The child saw only the honor of being chosen to represent Thailand before royalty, not understanding the complexity of what had actually occurred. That conversation had led to a profound realization about responsibility and legacy. The choices he made now would influence not just his own future, but the futures of every student he taught. They were watching him, learning from him, and building their own understanding of what it meant to be a martial artist and a representative of Thai culture. A year and a half into his assignment, Samchai received an unexpected visitor at the training facility. Crew Prazit, his old master, arrived unannounced one morning and watched silently as Samchai conducted a training session with the royal guards. "You have changed," the old master observed when they spoke privately afterward.
"Yes, Crew," Samchai replied.
"I hope for the better." Crew Prazit studied his former student with the same sharp eyes that had guided him through years of training.
"Before, you were a skilled fighter. Now, you are becoming a teacher. The difference is important."
They talked for hours about the path that had led from that devastating moment in the palace courtyard to this new life of service and instruction. Crew Prazit shared that he had never blamed Samchai for what happened, understanding better than anyone how a fighter's instincts could override conscious control in moments of stress. "The incident taught you something that no amount of training could have provided," the old master explained. "You learned that true strength sometimes means restraint, and that the greatest victories are often achieved without throwing a single strike." As Samchai's ban from professional competition neared its end, offers began arriving from promoters and training camps around the world. His notoriety from the palace incident had, ironically, made him more famous internationally than his fighting record alone ever would have. News stories about the fighter who knocked out a royal guard had spread his name far beyond Thailand's borders. But, when the ban finally lifted, Samchai made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. Instead of returning to professional competition, he requested permission to continue his work with the Royal Guard and his community service programs.
Captain Narong, now promoted to major, supported the request enthusiastically.
"Samchai has become an invaluable part of our training program," he wrote in his official recommendation. "His contribution to the Royal Guard's capabilities and his work with underprivileged youth represent the highest ideals of service to the kingdom." The approval came directly from the palace, along with an offer of permanent employment as a civilian instructor for the Royal Guard and funding for his community programs. On a humid Bangkok morning 2 years after the incident that had nearly destroyed his life, Samchai stood once again in the palace courtyard where everything had changed. This time, he was there for the graduation ceremony of the first class of Royal Guards to complete the new Muay Thai training program he had helped develop. Major Narong stood beside him as they watched young soldiers demonstrate the techniques they had learned. The same ceremonial music played, the same golden spires gleamed in the sunlight, but everything felt different now.
"Do you ever regret what happened?" Major Narong asked quietly. Samchai considered the question carefully.
The path from shame to redemption had been difficult and painful, but it had led him to a life more meaningful than anything he could have achieved as just another successful fighter.
"No," he answered finally.
"I regret that I hurt you, and I regret the embarrassment I caused. But I don't regret where the journey has led us." As the ceremony concluded and the new graduates celebrated with their families, Samchai thought about the children who would attend his weekend classes, the soldiers who would carry their training into service for their country, and the legacy he was building one lesson at a time. The boy from the mountain village had come to Bangkok seeking fame and fortune in the ring. The man he had become had found something far more valuable, a purpose that extended beyond personal achievement to genuine service to others. Sometimes, he realized, the most devastating defeats open the door to the most meaningful victories. The elbow strike that had frozen him with horror in that ceremonial courtyard had ultimately freed him to become the person he was truly meant to be.